will affect the licensing laws in the region. We have partner Sarah Smith here to tell you a bit more about it.
Hello. Well, I understand there was a very exciting party last night, and it looks as if the turnout's been reduced as a result of that. A few sore heads this morning, I think. My name's Sarah Smith, and I'm a partner in the leisure and licensing team at Sintons. First of all, a little bit about Sintons. We are Newcastle-based. We're a full-service law firm, which basically means we cater for all legal needs of most clients. It's a firm that was established in 1896, and in spite of the recent economic problems, we've steadily grown over the last decade, now having 28 partners, over 200 employees, and we sit as the third largest law firm in the region. As part of the leisure and licensing team, there's a little bit more to the client's requirements than just getting a premises license or a club premises certificate. We're able to provide our clients with the full cover of legal services. You'll see there that the 4 pictures of myself and 3 of my colleagues who deal with commercial property, the corporate side, and regulatory matters such as noise, pollution, odour pollution, health and safety matters. But we also are fed into, with our team, with our banking and construction lawyers, our dispute resolution, debt collection, insolvency lawyers, a full employment team, and also even things like intellectual property for trademarks, copyright, etc. So we pride ourselves on the fact that we can offer leisure clients a full service, which means that they get a one-stop shop, but also means that we can be very competitive on our prices. The people that we tend to have advised or regularly advise are all set out there, and there's quite a wide range of clients. And I think it certainly struck me during the recession, the level of innovation and diversity that we've come across in the licence and leisure world. You know, we've had stately homes converted for wedding venues, for big rock concerts, even to licensing religious institutions. And one I did last year was St. Nicholas's Cathedral in the city, not just the vestry part, the hall, but the actual church building itself. Again, everybody is looking to keep their offering viable. And just a few pictures of the type of venues that we have licensed in the recent months. That's the sell over. What I was going to talk to you today, following on from Stephen's talk, is really the late night levies and early morning restriction orders. These are the hot topic of the moment, and I'm just going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour as to what they actually involve. Late night levies, first of all, well, why have they been introduced? The government have decided to introduce them to what they say is to rebalance the Licensing Act 2003 in favour of local communities. It's increasing the powers available to local authorities and the police to tackle alcohol-related problems in specific area, and particularly relating to the late night economy. The levy itself is obviously a charge, and the idea is that the councils can make and the police can make more money from those licence holders. And the view is, I suppose quite logically, that if people are benefiting from the late night economy, they should contribute towards the problems that it creates. So the late night levy is a discretionary power. It's up to the local authorities whether or not they want to implement it, and it allows the authority to collect an annual fee from all licensed premises authorised to supply alcohol between 12 midnight and 6. If the authority chooses to introduce the levy, it will affect all licensed premises within the authority, those which supply alcohol during the late night period. And I'm just going to split that down a little bit for you. I think one of the flaws, in a way, of the late night levy is that it will affect all licensed premises within an authority area. It cannot apply to part. It's got to be the whole area. And I think, in some respect, Newcastle is a perfect authority for a levy because it is a small authority and it is virtually all urban. But you can imagine a county such as Northumberland, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to put in a levy when small country pubs, which have never had any issues in their lives, will be paying a tax for policing, which they'll never see. But if the authority brings it in, it's the whole of the area. And it affects any premises which are licensed to supply alcohol, so anybody who holds a premises license or a club premises certificate to sell alcohol. It doesn't affect temporary event notices, so you could still apply for one of those without any charge being made. And it applies during the late night supply period. As Stephen's indicated, Newcastle are consulting on a levy between 12 midnight and 6, so for the full levy period. The hours are chosen by the local authority and they will be the same every day. In reality, most authorities, if they're consulting on a levy, will start it from 12 or 1 o'clock. There's little point bringing in a levy that kicks in at 3 o'clock because you're not going to catch many people, so you're not going to make much money out of it. The implications are quite wide, but if your licence permits supply of alcohol at any time during the late night period, that 12 to 6 period, the levy kicks in. So even if your licence, say for example at Newcastle, every day it finishes at 12, but on New Year's Eve you're allowed to operate till 1 in the morning, the levy will apply. And it's not an argument to say that, well, I don't use it, so I don't need to pay it. If it's on your licence, for even just one day, the levy kicks in. And that's something a few operators who are around that 12 o'clock cusp will have to think about. The government have indicated that free minor variation should be available to operators for a limited period, and the guidance is indicating that the free variation should be offered for about 2 months. There is an opportunity, therefore, to reduce your hours, but as a licensing lawyer, I would be advising my clients to be extremely careful about that, because the reason being that if you reduce your hours and after a year or two the council decide the levy's not working and they scrap it, it will be extremely difficult to get your hours back, particularly if you're in a cumulative impact policy area. So we're working at ways of putting in minor variations which will keep you out of the levy but won't necessarily lose you hours if the levy's scrapped. So take advice on that. There are exemptions to the late night levy, but they are restricted. The local authority for a start has to implement them. It is down to their discretion as to whether they apply exemptions, and the exemptions come in certain categories. It's not for the council to decide which ones they are. These are the permitted exemption categories that can be applied, and these are the only ones. So you'll see there, Newcastle City Council are currently consulting on all of those exemptions, save for country village pubs. It's probably a given, I don't think there are any in the area, and business improvement districts. They're not giving that as an exemption. Reductions are also available, but again, it's at the discretion of the council as to whether or not that is offered. And the maximum reduction that anyone can get is 30%. It could be less, but it can't be more. And it will only apply to premises that are either members of a business-led best practice scheme, which we would probably know as best bar none in the area, or if they're in receipt of small business rate relief with a rateable value of less than 12 grand. Newcastle are not offering discounts at this time. It may be in the future that they will, dependent on the business-led best practice scheme, as Stephen's mentioned, but at this time, it's unlikely to be a discount on the levy in Newcastle. And that's actually what the levy is. This is quite an interesting side because most of the applications that we do come into Band C. So operators are looking at the levy of about £100 a month. But we do have a few premises at the far end, which is Class E, with a multiplier. They would be premises such as large nightclubs in prime locations. And for them, the levy is going to be over £1,000 a month. So that will obviously have an impact on the bottom line. Where does it go? Well, Stephen's obviously mentioned what they're going to do with the levy. The minimum 70% of the net levy goes to the police. The rest goes to the council. The police can do whatever they want with it. The council have to put it towards policing of the late night economy. This council are obviously in discussions with the police, and it is very likely that all of that money will end up towards policing the late night economy. But Islington, for example, are currently in a pre-consultation consultation, and they are not committing to the levy at the moment for fear that money collected in Islington will be used by the police for the wider London area. So it is important when councils go out to consultation that they secure where their money is going to go, otherwise they're basically collecting a levy which is never going to improve the situation in the area that they want it to. Collection of the levy, it's an annual payment, recoverable as a debt, A non-payment can lead to suspension of the premises licence. Comes into force, well, the legislation is there. It's up to the council to decide whether or not it wants to implement it. The council must consult, but it's very limited in what it needs to consult on. Date of implementation, Newcastle's 1st of November. The hours it will apply, the exemptions and the reductions, and that's it. People get to have their say about what they feel about those points, but at the end of the day, there's no hearing. It just needs to be taken into account. So moving on to early morning restriction orders. These are slightly different from the levy. Again, it's a discretionary power, but it is much more of a guillotine effect in that the local authority can restrict the sales of alcohol in the whole or part of their area for a specific time. And in reality, with an MRO, you're more likely to get a cut-off period where they say no more sale of alcohol after 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. These have actually proved to be much more popular with local authorities so far since they've come into being, which surprises me a little bit, and I'll come on to that later on. But currently, Sunderland, Northampton and Norwich are considering putting in an MRO. Hartlepool are consulting on a 2 o'clock MRO, and Blackpool are consulting on a 3 o'clock MRO. Different from the levy in that they can cover a whole or a part of an area. So you could just put an MRO around a special stress area or a cumulative impact policy area, and you could have several MROs throughout the authority area. It doesn't have to be a solid area. There could be little islands in the MRO area where it doesn't apply. Similar to the levy in the fact that it applies from 12 to 6 a.m, so obviously it's affecting the late night economy. It can apply on certain days only, it can apply for different hours on different days, and it can be open-ended. So you could have an MRO which says that everything's got to cease at 12 midnight on a weekday, things can go to 2 o'clock on a weekend, or you may even get an MRO which says that you can't operate beyond 3 o'clock during the months of July and August. For example, a seaside town might bring something like that in. They can only be brought in if the local authority consider it appropriate, but it's a fairly wide discretion. They don't need to show that there's been past harm, and I think it would be difficult to argue against one if the council are meant on bringing it in. It affects anybody who sells alcohol, so your club premises license, so your licence holder, your premises licence holder, and also temporary event notices. So anything, anywhere that anything that gives you the authority to sell alcohol, it's a guillotine effect, it cuts it off. There are 2 exemptions to the MROs. These are not discretionary, these apply to all premises, all MROs, and that's the supply of alcohol to residents of premises with overnight accommodation, so your hotels by way of minibars, room service, and New Year's Eve. So very small exemptions there. And the process is slightly different from the levy. There's much more consultation here. All of the people who would be affected would be consulted, there'd be advertising, they'd obviously need to demonstrate that they have evidence to justify introducing it, albeit that there's probably not a lot required for that. But operators will have the chance to have their say, and there will be a hearing. They can make representations as to why it's not appropriate to have an MRO, first of all, and also why it's not appropriate to apply an MRO to them specifically. So if there is an MRO coming into your area, it's very important to consider making those representations. MROs, to my mind, are a very draconian tool. They shouldn't be used as a weapon of first resort. The authority should really consider other ways of controlling problems before they bring one in. And obviously there are very important implications of introducing a late night levy. And I'll sum my view up this way. Personally, I think the MRO is a far more dangerous power than the levy. With the levy, at the end of the day, it's a tax. Most people will suffer by way of the levy £100 a month. Yes, others may have to pay out more. And there may be some premises who feel that they're paying a levy and they're getting no benefits. But on the whole with the levy, you're paying some money, you're getting something back by way of policing, street pastas, street cleaning, etc. And I think that's manageable. With the MRO, the guillotine effect of closing a town or a city off completely at a certain time will lead to displacement. People will still want to drink beyond whatever time the cut-off is, they will just move elsewhere, and that creates new problems. For example, if Sunderland ever do bring their MRO in to 3 o'clock, all that will happen is that the people who were drinking in Sunderland will either leave earlier to come into Newcastle, or they'll not go out in Sunderland at all, or they'll leave to go into suburban areas around Sunderland. That not only has a massive knock-on effect on the leisure industry in Sunderland, it has a knock-on effect on other businesses such as taxis and takeaways. Ultimately, it means that people will not invest in a city centre or an MRO area, and it can lead to ghost towns. And that is exactly where we are at the minute with Blackpool. Blackpool started to consult on a 3 o'clock, and we're now told that they've put it on hold, because I think they realise that by putting in a guillotine effect where everything in Blackpool closes at 3 o'clock, they could kill their town. So it's a lot to think about, but if a lot of authorities are much more keen to put in MROs at the moment, but I don't think they actually realise the full implications for the future. So that's it. Just to remind you again about who we are and our leisure services team. I think the strapline at the bottom is if you're talking leisure, then you should be talking to Sintons. And finally, a few words that people have said about us. My personal favourite is the bottom one, which is I am a force to be reckoned with, which I think is to do with my negotiating skills and not my martial arts skills. Thank you very much for listening.
Some very good